Some stories don't begin with a slap or a scream. Mine began with a seating chart. There was no mistake, no oversight, just a carefully printed map of a celebration where I did not exist. My sister was getting married. My name wasn't on the list. I told myself it was a misunderstanding that families don't forget daughters. But when my mother stood up at the rehearsal dinner and asked me to leave, not even my silence could protect me anymore. They said I was jealous, bitter, incapable of joy. But I had once written a confidential report that flagged her fiancé as a risk no one wanted to investigate. Back then, I stayed quiet. This time, I didn't. I sent the file. Then I watched from a distance as the man they all clapped for was led away in handcuffs on the happiest day of her life. They never saw me there. But they all felt what I did. There was no name card for me at the head table. My mother's 65th birthday dinner was held at a private room in the nicest steakhouse in Greenville. The lights were low and warm, the napkins folded like roses, the menu printed in gold ink. Everyone was seated before I arrived, even though I was only 7 minutes late. I scanned the table and saw Lana, my younger sister, laughing beside Mom, reaching over to fix the little brooch on her collar like it was her job to sparkle in every room. She was wearing white. Of course. There were 20 seats. I found mine wedged at the far end near the door to the server's hallway next to Uncle Paul, who smelled like cigar ash and tried to sell me vitamins at every family function. Lana was seated dead center. I sat down quietly. Daniel, my boyfriend, had opted to stay home. He knew my family gatherings never ended well for me. I unfolded the napkin, forced my shoulders to relax, and tried not to hear Mom introducing Lana's latest business success for the 3rd time that month. Lana had launched Lush Theory 4 years ago. It was pitched as a sustainable fashion brand for conscious women, though it always seemed more like a vanity project. Dad had used part of his retirement fund to buy out the previous owner. Mom called it an investment in legacy. Me, I was the legacy they never claimed. I used to work for a federal cybersecurity contractor out of DC called VectorLock. But after a burnout incident and a near collapse from stress in 2020, I left. I now did consulting under my own name for a few quiet clients. I paid my rent on time. I cooked dinner. I breathed. That was enough for me, but not for them. Mom clinked her glass with a fork and said, "Tonight I want to raise a toast not just for another year of life, but for the joy of seeing my daughters become women." "Lana, you continue to shine." Everyone applauded. I smiled politely. No one looked in my direction. It had always been like this. I was the quiet one. The serious one. The one who asked too many questions at dinner and didn't like being hugged. I never wore pink, I hated crowds, and I spent most of middle school reading Encryption Theory instead of shopping for lip gloss with Lana. By the time we hit college, we were practically strangers. She studied marketing. I went into applied mathematics. Our paths split like oil and water. And Mom. She didn't fight it. She leaned toward whichever child smiled bigger. After the plates were cleared and dessert was brought out, Lana stood and announced something with a dazzling smile. "I want to share some exciting news," she said. "Brent proposed. We're getting married this June in Charleston." Gasps. Applause. A couple of aunts reached out to touch her hand like she'd just announced a royal engagement. Even Dad stood to give her a proud half-hug. And Brent. He was standing just behind her chair. I hadn't even noticed him before. Tall, perfectly tailored suit. Dark hair, deep dimples. One of those men who could make you trust him with your life or your checkbook in under 5 minutes. But there was something else. My stomach knotted. I had seen that face before. Not in family photos or social media posts. Somewhere older. Colder. I tilted my head slightly, studying his profile as he kissed Lana's temple. He held it for a moment too long. After dessert, I excused myself to the restroom. But I didn't go straight there. I stepped outside into the cool April night, leaned against the brick wall, and pulled out my phone. I opened an encrypted notes app I still used for sensitive client work. I typed a name, Brent Dalton. And then another just to see if it still echoed like it did in the back of my mind, Alexander Duval. The name that once belonged to a suspect in a financial laundering case. I'd flagged in a cross-border data flow 3 years ago. The case was quietly shelved, lack of hard evidence. But the name stuck. The photo was fuzzy. Not enough to act on. Just enough to leave an itch in the brain. But now the face wasn't fuzzy. It was standing in my mother's birthday party, smiling next to my sister, promising a future. Back inside, Lana was showing off her engagement ring. She didn't look at me once. I slipped away before anyone noticed. No one asked why. No one ever did. I drove home in silence with the windows halfway down, letting the wind fill the car so I didn't have to think. But the moment I pulled into the parking lot of our apartment complex, my hands were already shaking on the steering wheel. Daniel wasn't home. He had a conference call with a client in Tokyo, which was a blessing. I didn't want to speak yet. I needed facts first. I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter and logged into an old unused work drive I'd backed up before leaving Vector Lock. Most of it was encrypted junk I hadn't sorted through in years, but I remembered the case. It had haunted me not because of what it proved, but because of what it didn't. Financial trails looping through Switzerland, shell corporations based out of the British Virgin Islands, wire transfers flagged as humanitarian development but showing identical timestamps every Wednesday for months. We never got a clean identity on the man behind it. Just a name that kept changing. One of them had been Alexander Duval. The image file had been pixelated and cropped from a surveillance feed in Geneva. But the jawline. The eyes. The small scar near the left brow. Brent Dalton had the same scar. I clicked open the case notes. 2 names popped up linked to the Geneva account. One was a known intermediary, the other was listed as unverified Duval, B. Dalton. My breath caught. Lana had no idea. None of them did. I didn't sleep that night. I went through every piece of digital trace I had, trying to prove to myself I was wrong. Because if I wasn't, it meant my sister was about to marry a man who had lied to governments across borders and might be using her to clean his money. The next morning I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was cheerful, maybe still glowing from last night. I need to talk to you, I said. About what, Brent? A pause. What about him? I hesitated, then forced the words out. I think he's not who he says he is. I've seen his face before. Years ago. In a case file. I think he's— Oh, Elise, she sighed. You always do this. Always looking for shadows in sunlight. Mom, I'm serious. You never trust people. It's exhausting. Lana is happy. That's all that matters. That's not all that matters if he's kind, generous, successful. Just because you're suspicious of everyone doesn't mean the rest of us are blind. I'm not jealous, Mom. I didn't say jealous, but you're alone and bitter, and I worry sometimes you just can't be happy for others. I said nothing. She clicked her tongue softly like she was brushing lint off a dress. I hope you're not planning to make a scene at the wedding. I hung up. An hour later, Lana called. What the hell, Elise? She didn't wait for a greeting. I heard you called Mom talking trash about Brent. What is wrong with you? I'm trying to protect you. From what? A man who actually loves me. Is that so hard to believe? You don't know who he is? And you do. I have reasons to believe. You don't have anyone. You don't even have a ring on your finger. You've never even brought Daniel to a family thing. You're 33 and hiding in a shoebox apartment doing contract work for invisible clients. But sure. Tell me who I should marry. I felt something freeze inside me. Stay out of this, Elise. I mean it. The call ended. I closed my laptop and stared out the window for a long time. They wouldn't listen. That evening I took a different approach. There was a man listed in the wedding program online as the officiant. Pastor Alan Rowe. I found his contact on the church's website. He was officiating the ceremony at a historic inn in Charleston. I sent him an anonymous email from a secure server. I didn't accuse Brent directly. I just stated that someone on the groom's side might be involved in financial misconduct and suggested they review all legal paperwork thoroughly. I thought that would be enough. 3 days later, I got a call from my mother again. Elise, her voice was cold. Did you contact the officiant of Lana's wedding? How did you? Because he told us. And forwarded the message. It was from an encrypted address, but the phrasing, the timing, the references. It was obviously you. I opened my mouth, but she kept talking. You've crossed a line. This is harassment. I'm trying to protect her. If you would just listen, number. You don't get to ruin this for her. You don't get to ruin this for us. I'm not coming to ruin anything. You're not coming at all. I blinked. Excuse me, you're not invited. We're rescinding your place. You've made yourself unwelcome. Do not show up. She hung up. I stood there, phone still against my ear, long after the line went dead. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I went back to my computer. I pulled up every digital trail I had touched since the night of that dinner. Every document, every photo, every trace. I started sorting, tagging, creating backups. If they wanted me silent, they should have been smarter. By midnight, I had a folder labeled Charleston Exit. And it was only just beginning. The rehearsal was held at the Gadsden House in downtown Charleston, a renovated antebellum mansion with white columns and manicured hedges. The invitation I'd received weeks ago said 3 p.m. sharp. I arrived at 2:57 dressed in a navy shift dress, hair pulled back, no makeup except lip balm. I had hoped it would be enough of a peace offering, enough to be quiet and present without inflaming anyone. I brought no questions, no opinions. I just wanted to look Lana in the eyes one more time before she signed her life away. The main hall was already filled. Dozens of people milling around, flower girls practicing their walk music cues, being tested, servers wheeling in carts of champagne for the post-run reception. I stood in the doorway for a second too long, scanning for a familiar face. Lana caught sight of me first. Her face froze, then she turned sharply toward our mother, who was adjusting a centerpiece on the head table. Sandra Warren, always the perfect host, always in control. She turned, followed Lana's eyes, saw me, and walked forward in her nude heels with a grace that would have made a senator's wife jealous. "Elise," she said, her voice low but cutting, "what are you doing here?" The invitation said, "You were told not to come." Her eyes didn't flinch. "This is not your place." People were beginning to turn, whispering. The wedding planner glanced up from her clipboard. A few members of Brent's family leaned toward each other. I stood still. Mom's voice lifted half an octave. "You are not welcome here, Elise. Please leave. Now." She didn't scream, that wasn't her style, but somehow it still echoed. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask why. I didn't beg. I turned. The door closed behind me with a hollow thud. Outside, the sunlight was almost mocking. Charleston was in full bloom, wisteria spilling over the gates, horse-drawn carriages rattling down East Bay Street. I walked to the rental car and sat behind the wheel, hands resting in my lap. My phone buzzed. "Daniel. Are you okay?" he asked as soon as I picked up. "They asked me to leave." I heard the quiet inhale on the other end. "You want to let it go?" I stared out the windshield. A couple was walking past holding hands. The woman wore a white sundress, her hair curled like Lana's. She's marrying a man who was flagged in international laundering cases for 3 years. I lost 2 months of sleep on those reports. I think about them more than I think about her, so no, I don't want to let it go. "Then what do you want?" "I want proof. I want them to see what I saw." Daniel paused. "Then let's do it. But clean. No emotion. Just the data." I didn't answer right away. Because part of me still wanted to walk away. Burn the folders, block their numbers. Start fresh in Ithaca or Boulder or wherever the air was quieter. But then I thought of Lana's voice on the phone. "You don't even have a ring. You're 33 and hiding in a shoebox apartment." And I remembered our mother, eyes full of disgust, telling me to go home like I was a threat. They never saw me as anything but a warning sign. Never a daughter, never a sister. I opened the glove box and pulled out the flash drive I always kept there. "Just in case." "Let's get started," I said. Back at the Airbnb, Daniel had already opened his laptop and was setting up a secure sandbox environment. I connected mine, opened the Charleston Exit folder, and started sorting files. The Geneva image. The flagged wire transfers. The alias matches. The timestamps. There was something there. We both knew it. Daniel leaned over my shoulder. This account, he pointed, linked to a shell company that was shut down in Liechtenstein last year. The same name shows up in Lana's investor list. We need to trace it forward, I said. If he's still active, there'll be new money moving somewhere. We worked in silence for 2 hours. Daniel's fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing transactions, scraping metadata, reconstructing deleted logs. I monitored names, dates, notes scribbled in long-forgotten corners of secure backups. By nightfall, we had a list of 7 flagged transfers moving through different currencies in under 24 hours. He's laundering through fashion logistics, Daniel murmured. Using shipping codes to move digital currency through merchandise orders. And Lush Theory is the distribution point. I looked at the screen. The name of my sister's company was right there attached to an order supposedly shipping 800 units of organic silk dresses to a boutique in Amsterdam that hadn't updated its website since 2017. The orders were faked. The goods never moved. But the money did. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. We were in. But it wouldn't be enough. Not yet. The records could be planted. Coincidental. We needed something closer. Physical. Direct. We needed to get inside Lush Theory itself, and I knew just how to do it. Sharon Meyer still lived in Asheville, about 2 hours from Greenville. She had been the kind of college friend you kept in your phone but never expected to call. We shared dorm walls, late-night calculus panic, and one unfortunate spring break trip to Tampa, but we hadn't spoken in years. Still, I knew she had gone into forensic accounting, and if anyone could pull a financial thread and follow it all the way to the rot, it was Sharon. I texted her late that night. Hey. It's Elise Warren. Random, I know. But I need your help with something complicated. Confidential. Legal gray. Are you available this weekend? She replied within 15 minutes. Saturday. Noon. I'm curious now. Daniel and I left early Saturday morning and met her at a quiet corner booth in a bakery cafe just off Biltmore Avenue. Sharon looked the same. Clean ponytail, minimalist jewelry, eyes that missed nothing. She didn't waste time. You said legal gray. How gray are we talking? Financial fraud. International laundering. Shell companies. And my sister's wedding. I gave her the short version. She didn't blink. Just pulled out her laptop. Who are the players? I handed her a list of names. Brent Dalton. Alexander Duval. Several known shell entities linked to fashion and tech consulting across Europe. She skimmed, typing fast. I've seen Duval. His name floated in a Cyprus audit I did last year. Never confirmed. But the same wiring pattern came up twice. She turned the screen to show me. Wire transfer. $360,000 from a donor-advised fund labeled Global Sustainability Foundation. Routed through a brokerage in Nicosia, then into a U.S. business account under the name of Lush Theory LLC. My stomach tightened. That's Lana's company. She clicked deeper. The funds were marked as a grant. But there's no record of project delivery or material purchase. Not even a vendor trail, so it's a wash. Money goes in, nothing comes out. No clothes, no invoices, no fulfillment. It was a funnel. Sharon leaned back. You said you have access to internal Lush Theory documents. Not yet. But I will. Get them. If this is tied to Duval, we might be looking at something larger than a wedding scam. She printed the transaction path and handed me a copy. Use this carefully. If you go to law enforcement, make sure it's someone who understands offshore routing. Otherwise, it gets buried. I nodded. Thank you. Back in the car, I held the paper in my lap the whole drive home. Daniel kept his hands on the wheel but spoke softly. That transfer alone proves intent. But we need more. A trail, a pattern. We'll find it. We spent Sunday combing through publicly available tax filings, logistics reports, even marketing claims Lush Theory made on its own website. They boasted eco-friendly production in Portugal, partnerships in Finland, donations to ocean cleanup in the Bahamas. But none of the partner companies existed. The photos used in their press kit were taken from stock image libraries. Smoke and mirrors. Meanwhile, Daniel traced Brent's digital footprint through Swiss business registration archives. He found 3 companies under different names, all registered at the same address in Zug. One dissolved in 2021 after a federal probe. Another had shifted ownership to a holding firm in Belize. The third still operated under the name Terramid Ventures, listing Brent Dalton as external strategist. Terramid was a stakeholder in a luxury logistics chain that had conveniently partnered with Lush Theory for their global capsule campaign. "He's built a closed loop," Daniel said. "Money goes from one shell into Lush, then out through logistics, then back to himself, under a different name. Circular laundering." It was brilliant. And dangerous. I added the names to my working document. There were now 9 entities tied to Brent or Duval, with at least 4 showing movement in the past 6 months. None of it proved criminality outright. But together they painted a web no average groom should have access to. I opened the transactions Sharon had printed. I studied the code used in the memo line. GSF428BCYP. A grant identifier. Except when I searched the Global Sustainability Foundation database, the code didn't exist. Neither did any record of a partnership with Lush Theory. I sat back, stared at the ceiling. He created fake grants. He gave them to Lana's company. On paper, it made her look like a genius who attracted international philanthropy. In reality, she was a willing or blind participant in a laundering chain. My sister was either stupid or complicit. And I didn't know which was worse. Daniel broke the silence. "So what's the play? We need something inside. Emails, invoices. Something showing Lana knew. You think she does, she's not that dumb. And if she's not, then she's something else." He didn't answer. I looked back at the screen. The files. The names. We weren't just chasing a man anymore. We were chasing a system. And the next step meant getting closer to Lana than I had in a decade. Closer than she'd ever let me be again. I scheduled the appointment under a different name, using a generic business email and a LinkedIn profile I'd created the night before. Madison C. Reeve, founder of a boutique retail group in Denver looking to expand into sustainable womenswear. I used my real voice on the call, lowered slightly, clipped my vowels. Emily never questioned it. She was too eager. Lush Theory's main office was tucked inside a converted brick building on King Street in Charleston, 3 blocks from the wedding venue. Sleek signage. Matte glass doors. A receptionist who offered lemon water before I even asked. Emily Brant came out to meet me. She was younger than I remembered, probably 26, with hair like Lana's and the same crisp smile. She wore a blazer 2 sizes too large, trying for fashion-forward, missing classic by a few inches. I stood to shake her hand. "We're so excited about the opportunity," she said. "Your email mentioned high-volume placement in 3 cities. That's right, Denver, Austin, and Seattle. Our flagship stores are focused on natural materials, direct-sourced goods. Your label came highly recommended." She beamed. "Let me show you around." She led me through a minimalist, open-concept workspace. Desks with backlit nameplates. Mood boards pinned with swatches. Half the room looked like a showroom, the other half a financial tech lab. And that was the giveaway. Real design firms didn't have 4 monitors per desk and international clocks on the wall. They didn't hire data engineers for textile sourcing. This wasn't a fashion company, it was a laundering front with better lighting. I kept smiling, nodding as she pointed out new campaign ideas and influencer partnerships. When we reached the private meeting room, she offered me tea. "So, Madison, tell me what attracted you to us." I took a sip of mint green and leaned forward slightly. "Your reach. Your credibility. Especially in Europe." Her face lit up. "We've done incredible things in a short time. My sister is brilliant, honestly. She knows exactly who to bring into her orbit. Brent's network has been a game changer." She said it casually, like a brag she'd rehearsed. I tapped the small recorder button hidden under my sleeve. "Brent's contacts in Geneva and Berlin open doors that most brands our size can't even dream about," she went on. "Logistics, tax breaks, high-volume resellers. It's all about connections." How soon did those connections start? Within months of the acquisition. He had the infrastructure, we had the brand. And just like that, she admitted it. Infrastructure. Logistics. All the words that meant money moved in circles without anyone touching a box. I glanced around the room. No cameras. Just a white noise generator in the corner. Emily stood to grab a folder. "We're preparing a new investor packet. I'll give you a preview." While she turned, I slipped a small USB receiver under the side of the desk. It would connect to the nearest open laptop and download any local file metadata it could reach within a 60-foot radius. I only needed 5 minutes. Emily handed me the folder. "Projected Q3 growth," she said proudly. "As you'll see, our numbers are strong." I flipped through fabricated graphs and meaningless words. Every line was a lie. I could feel it. But I kept the act. "You and your sister built something impressive," I said. Her eyes softened. "She's everything I want to be. Strategic. Fearless. Loyal." I smiled. "And untouchable." She laughed. "God, yes." The conversation drifted to fabric sourcing, influencer rates, retail margins. I let her talk. After 20 more minutes, I excused myself for a call, stepped into the hallway, and slipped the receiver into my purse. "We'll be in touch soon," I told her. I walked 2 blocks before calling Daniel. "Got it," I said. Full capture window. 24 minutes. Should be enough to scrape metadata at least. "Send it over. I'll start decrypting." That night, while Daniel ran the files through a filter, I opened the transcript of the recorder and marked the key quotes. Brent's connections. Infrastructure. Tax break schemes. Her phrasing wasn't careless, it was coached. The file dump from the receiver finished uploading around 11 p.m. Most of the documents were junk. Memos, mood boards, holiday party planning emails. But 2 items stood out. The first was a scanned ledger titled Q2 Movement, Final Draft. It was mostly coded. But one line was plain English. "Final transfer the 24th of June, Geneva." My pulse spiked. That was 2 days after the wedding. The second file was a PDF attachment from an internal email chain. Subject: Closure Protocol. The content was simple, a single sentence. "Once the transfer is complete, we shut everything down, permanently." I stared at it until the words blurred. They weren't planning a wedding, they were planning an exit. Daniel stayed up late that night running decryptions while I paced the apartment barefoot, unable to sit still. The weight of what we had found pressed against my chest like a hand I couldn't push off. A scheduled transfer. A shutdown protocol. All of it timed for 2 days after Lana's wedding. This wasn't just fraud. It was an exit plan. They were laundering what they could, clearing the books and disappearing. Brent and Lana weren't merging lives. They were erasing a trail. Around 2:30 a.m. Daniel finally shut his laptop and looked at me. "We need to be careful. Someone on their side knows we're watching." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The next morning, Daniel woke before me and started prepping a risk map, trying to reverse-link Brent's known aliases to physical addresses. I went to make coffee, but before I reached the kitchen, I heard Daniel's voice shift. Low, controlled, flat. He was staring at his inbox. "What is it?" He turned the screen toward me. There was a single message sent at 6:14 a.m. with no subject line and a blank sender ID. Attached was a JPEG image. I leaned closer. It was me. 5 years ago. Seated in a glass-walled conference room at Vectorlocks DC. Office, explaining a schema to 2 people just outside the frame. The photo was high-res, taken from inside the room. I recognized the whiteboard notes. The pen I was holding. Even the scar on my right hand from where I'd burned it making tea. That room was secure. No one took photos in those rooms. At least no one who should have. Below the image was a short message. "You're smarter than this. Walk away." I sat down. Daniel tried tracing the email's origin. It was routed through 6 obfuscated servers, bounced through Jakarta and Estonia, stripped of all metadata. A dead end. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing. And they had access to files that should have been long buried behind federal firewalls. I tried logging into my personal encrypted drive. It kicked back a restriction error. My account had been temporarily suspended for suspicious activity. My hands went cold. They were in. Or they knew someone who was. That's not automated, Daniel said quietly. Someone flagged you manually. He was calm, but I saw it in his eyes. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was real. We'd crossed a line. I texted Sharon and asked for a secure call. She responded in minutes. 30 minutes later, we were connected over Zoom, her face lit by multiple monitors. Her voice was flat-clipped, like she'd flipped into work mode. "You're being watched," she said before I even finished explaining. "You knew this was possible, I had a hunch. Elise, there's something you need to understand. Have you ever heard of the White Cross Network? Only vaguely. Financial Crime Division flagged them during a data integrity probe in 2019, but nothing stuck. They're real. And they're dangerous." Sharon leaned in. "I worked a private audit for a European bank last year. White Cross popped up in transaction loops involving dummy charities in the Netherlands, shell firms in Cyprus, and 2 logistics hubs in the Carolinas. It matched the exact movement signature of the file you just showed me. Someone's using Lush Theory as a pass-through, and if Brent's involved, he's either laundering for White Cross or operating as part of it. Why didn't you report it?" "Because no one touches White Cross without gloves." FinCEN tried twice. Both times the leads went dark. Sources disappeared. Entire accounts were wiped from backup. "Elise, if they know your ex-vector lock, they know you're capable of tracing this." I looked at Daniel. He didn't speak. "What do I do?" Sharon's voice softened just slightly. "First, back everything up. Offline, physical drives only, get a duplicate off-site. And don't send any more emails unless they're routed through a burn layer. If they've touched your login, you need to assume they're watching you in real time." I felt my pulse in my ears. "Do I stop number? But you move smarter. You don't go straight to law enforcement. You find someone who can't be bought. Someone with authority to escalate without raising flags." Daniel broke in. "I know a guy in Boston. Former FinCEN analyst. Went private last year. Trustworthy. I'll reach out." "Good," Sharon said. "And Elise, if anything else gets weird, you pull out. No questions." "Got it," I nodded. After the call ended, Daniel set up a cold backup on 2 new hard drives. I printed out key files and sealed them in a waterproof pouch. I slid it under a loose floorboard in Daniel's closet behind an old box of tax returns. By 10 a.m., I had deleted all access to my cloud accounts. Wiped my local folders. Changed phones. And yet I still felt like someone was breathing down my neck. Later that night, I sat alone in the kitchen with a glass of ginger tea. Daniel was asleep on the couch, one arm hanging over the side. The city outside was quiet, too quiet for June. I thought about calling Lana. Asking her, pleading even. But then I remembered the way she looked at me in Charleston. Not with anger, not with hurt, with indifference. Like I was noise. Like she'd already decided who I was and nothing I said could change it. That's when it hit me. They hadn't just cut me out. They had made peace with it. The wedding was a show, the transfer was the finale. Whatever Brent and Lana were planning, it was already in motion. And I was the only one running against the clock. Which meant I couldn't afford to hesitate. Not again. The message came in at 4:03 a.m. from a burner address I hadn't seen since 2021. No subject line. Just a Dropbox link and one sentence. "Thought you'd want this before it disappears." It was from Micah Reyes, a former supply chain analyst I'd worked with at VectorLock. After the company downsized, Micah left and took a consulting contract with a short-lived European apparel startup that briefly partnered with Lush Theory. We hadn't spoken in almost 3 years. I clicked the link with my VPN running and screen recorded the playback before watching. The footage was grainy but real. Lana was in a glass office with 2 men, one of them obscured by a curtain. She was dressed in a cream blazer, hair pinned, no makeup. Her hand reached out and signed a form. Then the man handed her a small envelope. She pulled out a matte black card. No logo. No name. Just a chip and a faint silver number along the top edge. She smiled and slipped it into her purse. The video timestamp: Geneva, July 2023. The location pinged to a private bank known for offshore asset shielding. The bank had been fined once in 2019 for failing to report structured transactions. I checked the branch's public records. The suite where that office once existed had since been leased to a co-working agency. The trail was almost cold. Almost. I clipped the video and sent it to Nina Chase at 5:26 a.m. She had once been a quiet force in the financial crimes unit at the FBI and a friend when I needed one most. We'd lost touch, but I remembered the exact night she drove me home after a 12-hour data breach case and told me to get out while I still had myself. Now I needed her to remember why I'd listened. She responded an hour later. Elise. This is something. But I need more. Possession of a blank card isn't enough. We need ledger ties, transfer logs, transaction IDs, something traceable. And you need to be careful. If White Cross is involved, this is way above the threshold for quiet handling. She was right. I closed my laptop and sat back. Daniel poured coffee without asking. I looked at him and said, "We're going back in." He blinked once. How investor angle again? Bigger deal. Bolder ask. He hesitated. We already pulled once. They'll be watching. Then we'll give them something better to watch. We spent the next hour crafting an email from Madison Reeves' inbox stating interest in acquiring Lush Theory's distribution pipeline for a full-price licensing deal. Daniel coded a trail to make it look like a reputable fashion group out of Vancouver was vetting the investment. Emily replied within 2 hours. Enthusiastic. An on-site meeting was scheduled for the next day. I wore a muted gray dress and thin gold earrings. Daniel came as my logistics advisor. We arrived with a printed term sheet and a proposal folder so polished it looked like it belonged to a hedge fund. Emily greeted us with the same wide smile, her posture a little stiffer than last time. Lana isn't in today, she said. But I'll walk you through the numbers myself. Perfect, I said. I'd love a more granular look. She led us into the same conference room. I scanned the walls quickly. No cameras, white noise humming. My recorder was already clipped inside my bag just in case. Emily opened a folder. Here's our internal spend projection for the next fiscal quarter. These aren't public yet, so we'd appreciate discretion. Of course. She slid the sheets across the table. I flipped through quickly but stopped at page 7. There, highlighted in faint blue, were a series of codes listed under alternate vendor channels. Each line item had a tag beginning with C93 or G428 followed by 4-digit strings and 3-letter currency abbreviations. One entry caught my eye. G428CYP-RET. Amount 126500. UR. Status confirmed. Transfer date the 24th of June. I traced it with my finger. What's this channel? She hesitated. It's part of our donor-advised integration. Some of our partners route funds through charitable structures before reinvestment. So this is inbound mostly. Some convert to outbound logistics spend. We reconcile quarterly. And these codes partner tracking. Geneva, Cyprus, Rotterdam. Currency differentiation. It was exactly what Nina needed. I nodded slowly, kept my face neutral. That's smart. Decentralized but traceable. Emily smiled a little proud. I made a mental map of the page and reached for my phone. Mind if I take a quick photo, just to show our legal rep? She glanced around unsure. Just the structure, not the amounts. I'll blur the values. She nodded reluctantly. I snapped one photo tilted to catch the entire chart. We finished the meeting in under 30 minutes. I thanked her and promised to follow up by Friday. She walked us to the door with a slight twitch in her left eye. She knew something didn't feel right. Back at the apartment, I sent the photo to Nina along with the full video of Lana receiving the card. 30 minutes later, she replied. Now we're talking. A few hours after that, she confirmed the codes matched flagged transaction signatures tied to White Cross routing patterns. She was initiating a closed review. I closed my eyes for a long moment and exhaled. For the first time, the FBI wasn't just watching. They were opening the file. And Brent's name was now on it. The morning of the wedding, Charleston was gold and quiet. Early sun filtered through the palmettos like nothing in the world was broken. I stood by the window of our rental holding a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. Daniel was still asleep, one arm tucked under his head, laptop open beside him with a dozen tabs still running. I hadn't slept. Not really. I'd spent most of the night sorting final files, redacting identifiers, converting screenshots into clean formats. At 5:03 a.m., I sent everything to Nina. Full ledger chart, encrypted video, metadata chain, cross-referenced aliases. The list of routing codes Sharon had flagged. It was all in one folder labeled simply Charleston. No subject line, no explanation, just a message. You'll know what to do. And I knew she would. At 8:17 a.m., Nina texted back. Received. I'm driving down now. No calls. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. We stayed inside. I didn't do my hair. I didn't change clothes. I didn't check social media. Daniel and I sat on the couch, quiet, his hand on my knee, mine on his wrist. The only sound was the tick of the cheap wall clock and the occasional hum of cars outside. At 10:12 a.m., I got a text from Hannah Lynn, an old friend of Lana's who didn't know I'd been disinvited. The ceremony's starting streaming here in case you want to watch. She included a Vimeo link. I didn't want to click it, but I did. The feed opened to a scene I knew too well. White chairs lined up beneath string lights, a floral arch overflowing with imported blooms. Lana stood at the far end, veil over her face, arms looped through our father's. Mom stood near the altar in a light blue gown, clutching tissues like she'd been rehearsing a movie role. There were at least 100 guests, some I recognized, most I didn't. Everyone was smiling. The camera panned slowly. Brent stood at the front, hands clasped, wearing a navy suit with a white pocket square and a confidence that had fooled almost everyone. The officiant began the welcome. We are gathered here today to celebrate the union of two souls bonded not just by love but by vision. Mom stepped forward. She held a mic. Her voice trembled, perfectly staged. When I look at my daughter and her future husband, I see the future of our family. This day is a testament to growth, to love, to success. A few guests nodded. Someone clapped. She smiled. I couldn't look away. Elise could not be here today, she added, and I felt my jaw tighten. But I know she wishes them well in her own way. Daniel muttered something under his breath. I didn't ask. The feed shifted. The officiant continued. If anyone has just cause why these two should not be joined, a commotion broke out off screen. People turned. Chairs scraped. A hush spread like a ripple. The camera operator moved toward the aisle. Dark suits entered from the back, swift and silent. No hesitation, 5 agents, no drawn weapons, just crisp movement. Authority that needed no introduction. One of them walked straight to Brent. Sir, I need you to come with us. Brent's smile froze. What is this? He asked, glancing at Lana, then at my father. The lead agent held up a badge. Brent Dalton, you are under federal investigation. Step forward. Someone gasped. Lana's voice cracked. What are you talking about? No, this is a wedding. Brent didn't move. His eyes darted to the right toward one of the side exits. The agent stepped closer. Now. Brent's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Slowly. The cuffs clicked behind his back. Murmurs swelled. Phones rose, guests stood. I watched it all happen in real time. Lana screamed, "This isn't real, you can't do this. We're getting married." He didn't do anything. The bouquet hit the ground. Someone knocked over a chair. My mother rushed forward, demanding answers. She reached for the badge and was held back gently but firmly. Ma'am, please stay behind the line. I stared at the screen. My chest was still. My hands steady. Daniel leaned forward, whispering, "That's it. It's done." I didn't reply. Lana dropped to her knees. The camera zoomed out. Someone in the crowd said the words before the news ever would. Federal warrant. International fraud. Extradition. The feed went black. I closed the tab. And the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was enough. By noon the next day, my name was on 3 different news sites. Not in bold, not in the headlines, but buried in the 4th paragraph. Elise Warren, a former cybersecurity analyst who provided initial evidence to federal authorities, declined to comment. They spelled it right. That was the first surprise. Daniel read the articles before I did. He filtered the worst ones. The tabloids. The gossip forums that speculated whether I'd sabotaged my sister out of jealousy or bitterness. One blog called me a disgruntled bridesmaid. I had never agreed to be one. By evening, a local reporter showed up outside our building in Greenville. I watched her from the window. She waited by the front gate with a notebook and a folding mic, asking anyone who passed if they knew me. A neighbor 2 floors down apparently did. She pointed to our unit. I unplugged the intercom. The building board left a voicemail asking if I was safe, if I needed assistance with press control. Daniel installed a new security camera that same night. The next morning, someone slid a card under our door. Tell your side. I didn't. What would I have said? That I did what the rest of them refused to, that when the room was on fire. I didn't pretend it was candlelight. The calls from unknown numbers came next. 6 in one afternoon. Then a message from my old boss at Vector Lock. I always knew you saw things the rest of us missed. I didn't know if it was praise or guilt. Then the text from my mother came in. 2 lines. How could you do this to your sister, to all of us? No question mark. Just accusation. I stared at it for almost an hour. My thumb hovered over the keyboard once. Then again, but I never replied. That night I went online and searched for the company website. Lush Theory's homepage had been replaced with a single message. This domain has been suspended. Contact legal for further inquiries. I checked their Instagram. All posts deleted. Comments disabled. Their last post had been the rehearsal dinner photo. Lana in a gold dress. Brent's hand around her waist. The caption read, "Forever starts now." The irony was exhausting. I switched apps. Lana had gone live. I hesitated before clicking. But I needed to see. She sat on a couch, hair pulled back, mascara smudged like she'd wiped it fast. She wore a sweatshirt that wasn't hers. Probably Mom's. The room behind her looked unfamiliar. Like a rented home or a hotel suite. Her voice cracked in the first sentence. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who had to explain her fiancé to the world. She laughed, bitter and forced. Brent lied to me. I didn't know what he was involved in. I didn't see it. Her eyes flicked to something off-screen, then back. We're cooperating. I'm cooperating. I've given everything I have to the investigation. Please don't judge me for loving the wrong person. She paused. And I want to speak directly to whoever sent those files in. I don't know what your motive was. I don't know if you were trying to help me or destroy me. But I hope you got what you wanted. I exited the feed before it ended. Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. She knows it was you. I know. Do you care? I thought about it. Not enough to regret it. We didn't speak for a while. The silence wasn't tense. Just shared. The next morning Nina called. We traced more than 13.4 million through Lush Theory's vendor network. 4 countries. 3 currencies. All linked back to Brent. We're building a RICO case now. I exhaled. Lana, she'll face civil charges. Possibly aiding and abetting. Depends on what else we find. But Elise, what you gave us cracked the lock. I didn't say anything. Nina added, we'll keep your name out of the next filings unless subpoenaed. I know that matters to you. Thank you. After the call, I stepped outside for the first time in days. The air was humid. It smelled like cut grass, and something sharp beneath it, like summer on the verge of burning. The neighbor across the hall opened her door at the same time. She didn't wave, just looked at me curious. Like she was trying to reconcile the name she'd read with the woman she saw in pajamas holding a grocery bag. I didn't wave either. They had seen my name now. But they still didn't know the story. And I had no intention of telling them. It took me 4 weeks to come back. Not because I wanted to, but because I had a storage unit in Greenville with 3 boxes of paperwork, old winter coats, and a safe full of documents from my days at Vector Lock. Daniel offered to go in my place, but I told him no. Some things you don't delegate even if they still sting. The drive felt different now. The trees were the same, the exits familiar. But I wasn't the same woman who had driven that highway trying to make her family listen. I wasn't trying to be let back in. I was just closing the door behind me. When I pulled into the parking lot of my old apartment building, 2 women walking their dogs glanced up. One of them whispered something. The other turned and looked right at me. That's her, the sister. The one who turned them in. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I just walked past them and up the steps, keys in hand. The lock clicked easily. The room smelled like old carpet and untouched air. A spider had claimed one corner of the windowsill. I left it alone. The first call came that afternoon. Blocked number. I answered anyway. Elise, my mother's voice said. We should talk. Her tone was softer than I remembered. Tired. What for? Because you're still my daughter. I let the silence stretch. I'm in town, she continued. Can I see you? I don't owe you anything. I know, but I'm asking anyway. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no, I just gave her a time and told her not to be late. We met at a small diner near Pelham Road. Neutral ground. Somewhere public enough that no one would shout. She arrived 5 minutes early, wore sunglasses she didn't take off, and carried a small handbag she never unzipped. When she saw me, her lips pressed together like she'd forgotten how to smile at me. Elise. I sat across from her and waited. She took off her glasses slowly. Her eyes were red. You look well, you don't? She gave a hollow laugh. That's fair. The server brought water. We didn't order food. After a minute, she folded her hands. I want to say I'm sorry. For what? For not believing you. For pushing you away. For how things happened. You didn't just push me, you erased me. She nodded. I was scared. Of me. Of what you were saying. Of what it meant. I watched her closely. There was no makeup today. Her hair hadn't been dyed in weeks. Her posture slumped in a way it never used to. Lana's name came up. Once. Briefly. She's not speaking to me either, she said. Said I ruined her life. She did that herself. Still, she's my daughter, so am I. She flinched. I wanted to reach across the table. To touch her wrist. To tell her that I understood fear. That I too had been scared. But that's not what I came for. I came to hear the apology, and she had given it. Now she wanted redemption. She looked up. I don't expect you to forgive me. But you're still blood. You're still home. No, I said. I'm not. Her mouth opened and closed. Home doesn't throw you out for telling the truth. Home doesn't choose optics over daughters. Home doesn't ask for silence as a show of love. She was crying now, quietly. She reached forward as if to touch my hand. I pulled mine away. I stood. I left something for you in the car. We walked outside together, but we didn't speak. I opened the back seat and pulled out a manila folder sealed in a plastic sleeve. What is this? It's everything. My notes. The routing charts. The internal memos. The images. My statement. The one you never asked for. Her fingers trembled as she took it. You don't have to read it, I said. But if you ever wonder how we got here, that's the truth. Not the version Lana told you, not the one from the live stream. Mine. She looked down, nodded slowly. Can I hug you, number? I turned and walked away before she could cry again. I didn't want to remember her like that. I didn't want her tears to be the last thing I carried from her. Back in the car, I sat with the engine off for a full minute. There was nothing left in Greenville for me. Not anymore, only ghosts. And I had finally stopped waiting for them to apologize. The article landed in my inbox around 9 in the morning. No subject line, no sender I recognized. Just a link and 5 words in the body. Thought you'd want to see. I clicked without thinking. Charleston wedding sting operation, groom sentenced to 16 years. It was already on the front page of the Post and Courier. Brent's mugshot stared back at me. Gone were the polished photos from the engagement party, the carefully curated profile of a rising international investor. This one was raw. His eyes looked sunken, his hair limp with sweat. I read slowly, as if tasting every sentence. Brent Dalton, 35, was convicted on 7 federal charges, including wire fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and falsifying identity documentation across 4 countries. The presiding judge issued a 16-year federal sentence with no possibility of early release. Dalton will serve in a medium security facility in Ohio pending further investigations. The report went on. A joint investigation between the FBI, FinCEN, and Interpol traced over $13 million through shell companies' encrypted transactions and crypto laundering chains. Lush Theory was named directly. The company has ceased operations and all assets remain frozen under federal order. I paused, then scrolled again. Lana Warren, co-founder and designer, accepted a federal plea deal. She will serve a 5-year probation. Sentence must pay restitution of over $2 million and is barred from owning or operating any U.S.-based business until 2035. No trial, no appeals. Just silence. My name was not bolded. But it was there. Authorities confirmed the investigation began with an anonymous source formerly employed in cybersecurity. No further details were given. No interviews. No comment from the family. I leaned back on the sofa and let the phone fall to the cushion beside me. It was done. Daniel came in from the patio holding 2 mugs of coffee. He caught my eye and tilted his head. "It dropped," I said. He handed me the mug and sat beside me. I passed him the phone. He scrolled in silence. I watched the steam rise from the coffee. After a minute he spoke. "We should hit the road. Weather's good until late tonight." I nodded. We'd already packed the car, 2 bags. A small box of tax documents. My laptop. 1 folded sweatshirt I hadn't worn since last winter. I hadn't told anyone we were leaving. Not that there was anyone left to tell. Daniel locked up while I scanned the apartment one last time. The windows were closed, the kitchen clean. The fridge empty except for 1 leftover soda and a slice of lemon cake I never finished. I left it. Outside the air smelled like pine and dust. The complex was quiet. Only one neighbor stepped onto her porch as we loaded the car. She didn't wave. I didn't either. We drove east toward North Carolina, cutting through stretches of flat farmland and gas stations too faded to matter. Neither of us turned on the radio. By the time we passed Columbia, my phone had buzzed 8 times. 3 from unknown numbers. 1 from a news agency. 1 from a Greenville talk show producer. And the last. From my mother. No voicemail. Just a text. "Are you happy now?" I didn't answer. Daniel glanced sideways at the screen. "Was that her?" I nodded once. I waited for the anger to rise, for the confusion or shame. But there was nothing, not even a ripple. Around noon, we pulled into a rest stop off I-77. The picnic benches were empty, the vending machines half-lit. Daniel went inside. I stayed back and stretched, walking toward a patch of woods just past the lot. It was quiet there. Wind in the trees, a squirrel darting up a pine. I sat on a low bench, my fingers wrapped around the warmth of my coffee mug, and watched the stillness. No headlines here, no FBI agents or cold phone calls, just air and sky. When Daniel returned, he handed me a protein bar and sat beside me. "You want to stop in Raleigh tonight?" he asked. "Let's keep going," I said. He smiled. Another hour on the road, the last email came in. This one from Nina. Subject: final confirmation. Attached: the public record of sentencing restitution. Amounts: official closure of the White Cross Network account branches tied to Brent's aliases. She had included 1 sentence at the end. "It would have stayed hidden without you." I typed only 2 words in reply. "No regrets." We drove until sunset. The highway stretched long and golden before us. Daniel reached over, his hand covering mine on the center console. "Think we'll plant roots this time?" he asked. I looked out the window. Forests gave way to hills, hills to quiet towns. "We'll see," I said. He smiled again, the kind that didn't need fixing, and I leaned back, feeling the miles fall behind us like dust. Everything that had needed to be said had been said. And everything that didn't, it no longer mattered. We didn't throw a party when the move was done. No champagne, no Instagram story, no obligatory pizza boxes on the floor. Just the sound of wind in the trees behind our little place in Ithaca, New York, and the quiet creak of floors that were finally ours. Daniel unpacked his laptop in the attic where the light hit at just the right angle in the afternoon. I claimed the sunroom, a space barely big enough for a desk, 2 chairs, and a plant I was determined not to kill. It overlooked a small garden that had probably once been loved, though now it looked wild and overgrown. I liked it that way. We didn't talk about Charleston. Not unless it was absolutely necessary for some paperwork or news update. Most of the time it stayed unspoken. Like an old scar you don't pick at. The headlines faded fast. The court hearings happened, sentencing came and went, reporters moved on to louder chaos. Brent was handed 16 years with no chance of early release. Lana received 5 years probation, a permanent business ban, and a mountain of restitution orders. The judge didn't hide her disdain for the lifestyle they'd tried to protect with stolen money. Somehow my name found its way into the last paragraph of every article. Just one sentence. Elise Warren, a former cybersecurity analyst, was instrumental in providing the first documented lead. They said it like I was a name on a press release. Like I hadn't lost everything along the way. But I didn't feel the need to correct them. In Ithaca, no one asked questions. Neighbors waved. The barista down the street learned my name without Googling it. At the farmer's market, people commented on my scarf or my tote bag or the radishes in my basket, not the court case I'd cracked open. Daniel and I spent long hours developing the software we had dreamed up for years. A platform that could trace digital financial trails across borders and currencies. A watchdog that didn't sleep. We called it Lantern. We didn't pitch it to investors. Not yet. We were building it clean, without shortcuts or noise. A week into our quiet routine, I received an email from a national journalist. She was polite. Careful. She said she wanted to give me space to reclaim the narrative. Her words. Not mine. She offered a profile piece. A recorded conversation. Full editorial control. I didn't answer. I archived the message and made tea. Later that night, I wrote something else. A short email to Nina. Just one sentence. Thank you for believing me when no one else did. Her reply came 2 days later. You didn't need me to believe you. You just needed to know someone was listening. I saved it. Not for evidence, just for myself. It snowed for the first time in late November. Thick soft flakes that blanketed the steps and turned the garden into something out of a postcard. I opened the back door and stepped outside barefoot, holding a mug of cinnamon tea. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the cold, letting the silence settle into my shoulders. There was no need to post anything, but I did anyway. One photo, my hand holding the mug. Outside the window, the white snow covering everything that used to feel heavy. No caption, no tags. But this time people saw it. I know because one of my old classmates commented. Just a heart. Then someone else reshared it. An old neighbor I hadn't heard from in years. Eventually, my cousin from Atlanta sent a message. I read everything. I'm sorry no one stood by you. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't carrying it anymore. I had let it go in pieces over the last few months. Every time I refused to explain myself, every time I deleted a draft message I'd once been desperate to send. Even my mother's voice had stopped haunting me. She had reached out once more. A voicemail. She was crying again. Saying she had never meant to choose sides. That Lana was just confused. That maybe we could meet in the spring. I didn't save it. Daniel found me that evening sitting on the porch steps, knees tucked up under my coat, watching the sky turn lavender over the backyard. He sat beside me without a word. His presence was like a blanket, steady and warm without needing to say anything. After a while, he asked me if I missed it. The city, my family, the job. I answered with a shrug. What I missed wasn't a place. or even people. It was the version of myself I used to be before I was made to feel like I didn't belong. But that girl had grown up. She didn't need to be let back in anymore. She had found her own door. The next morning, we woke early and went for a walk before sunrise. The snow had settled in thick drifts overnight. No footsteps, no tracks. It was like the whole world had been reset. Daniel pulled my glove off and laced our fingers together. Neither of us said a word. Sometimes silence is the loudest freedom there is. And that's when I knew. This was not the ending. Not for me. Not for anyone who has ever been erased from their own table, their own photo, their own family. It was the beginning of something far more honest. If you've ever been the one they didn't count on, the one they pushed to the edges, the one they pretended wasn't watching, tell your story. Don't wait for their apology, make them hear the truth anyway.